SeaFoam Sales Company and SUR&R have teamed up to deliver a powerful fuel injection intake and combustion chamber cleaning tool.
This high-performance cleaning system is safe for all components, including plastics, gaskets, seals, O-rings that you're going to run into in the fuel system. It has literally hundreds of applications, both foreign and domestic. It gives you the most thorough cleaning of fuel rails, fuel injectors, combustion chambers, throttle bodies, intake passages, intake valves, and even EGR systems. It's going to easily hook up to shop air. It'll work on both gas and diesel engines, through the fuel rail, and in through the air intake systems.
As part of a scheduled maintenance program, it will improve a vehicle's emissions quality and remove carbon deposits from the engine systems. The system includes SeaFoam motor treatment cleaner solution, a canister, adapter lines for gas and diesel engines, a block-off adapter, and an S-tool.
And it's very easy. Let me show you a little bit about how it works. For doing fuel injectors, put a solution of half SeaFoam, half gasoline in the canister itself. So you're going to want to disable the in-tank fuel pump either by pulling a fuse, pulling a relay. You're going to want to hook the tool up to the fuel system. We have several adapters that can hook onto your fuel rail. Hook it up to shop air. You want to adjust it to manufacturer's specifications, or 5 psi if it's a return type system, or you can block it off using a lot of the adapters will fit on the return line also. And in doing that, we have an exclusive block off tool going onto the fuel rail. That's going to snap in. That way you can run your pressure wherever you want. You don't have to pinch off any fuel lines and run it that way. One of the changes that we have made, which is for safety and makes it a little bit more universal, connect your Schrader adapter into the fuel rail adapter itself, and then when connecting, just simply hook up with the adapter on the end of the canister. The quick connects that come from SUR&R with the system make it very easy for the technician to hook the tool up and do an efficient, thorough cleaning job on the fuel and intake systems. Start the engine. We'll let it run for a few minutes. All of the hoses are transparent. So when you're running it, you're going to be able to tell when the hose is full and when it's starting to get to the end, because you're going to start having little bubbles floating down through the line. After you get done doing the fuel system treatment, we have an S-tool. This allows you to do a much more thorough cleaning of the throttle body and the air intake system itself. This adapter puts out a 360-degree mist into the system. You hook it into your throttle body. You want it on the downward side or the inward side of the throttle plate itself. So when you put it in, you're going to slide it in there. You're going to put your air intake hose back on to help hold it in place. You want to have the tip of the nozzle right at the edge of the throttle body itself. This is for using a solution of straight SeaFoam. However, you do not want to do this cleaning on diesel engines. Start the engine up. With this installed, your intake boot back on. Run the engine at about 800 to 1000 RPMs above base idle. Atomize it through, and then again, going back to the clear hose on the tool itself, you start seeing bubbles coming through. Once the bubbles come through, get towards the end, you know you can shut the key off, give it a hot soak. And the hot soak meaning it's going to allow the SeaFoam to actually soak into the deposits on the backs of the valves and the tops of the pistons, and all through your intake plenum, through the intake system itself. Even getting into the EGR system a little bit, which is going to be beneficial. And now for the road test. You want to drive the vehicle aggressively, varying engine speed, and you're going to get some smoke and some extreme fumes coming out of the tailpipe. But when it is all said and done, it's going to be a lot cleaner with a lot better emissions.
The first steps required for using the SeaFoam system involve getting the vehicle ready for service. Begin by running the engine to normal operating temperature, then turn the engine and all engine accessories off.
Step one is going to be to disable the in-tank fuel pump, which in this case we can do by simply pulling the fuel pump fuse. And you can pull the relay also if you would like. And now for this step, we're going to add a solution of 8 ounces of gasoline and 8 ounces of SeaFoam to the canister. To do that, simply unscrew the lid. Already measured out the gasoline. Oh, and by the way, I have the shutoff valve in the off position. Then we're going to take 8 ounces of SeaFoam. And then we're going to reattach the lid, and now we are ready to hook up to the vehicle. Okay, next step is to disconnect the fuel line going to the fuel rail. But just a couple precautions I'd like to say first. One, safety glasses, always a good idea. And two, having a fire extinguisher handy or knowing the location of the nearest fire extinguisher to where you're working, because you never know. Then we're going to remove the safety clip from the fuel rail itself. Secondly, selecting an appropriate fuel line disconnect tool, we are going to disconnect the fuel line from the fuel rail. Wrap it in a rag just in case you get any residual pressure. Now for the next step, we are going to hook the adapters and the canister up to the fuel rail and the engine. So for this one, I have selected the 3/8 90-degree adapter that's going to go right onto the fuel rail, along with the Schrader valve adapter to hook onto the tool. Then we are going to hook onto the fuel rail of the engine and hook the hose to the Schrader adapter. Even though we have the fuel pump fuse disconnected, so there is no power going to the pump, just in case there's any residual fuel in there as a safety feature, we are going to use our block off tool along with the straight 3/8 quick disconnect fitting. So we're just installing that in there and then putting that in the fuel line itself just as an added precaution. Next, we hook shop air to the canister. Next step is adjusting the air pressure going to the canister. For this particular vehicle, manufacturer specs are around 50 psi, so we're just going to use the regulator. Crank the gauge up, right there about 50, and then turn on the valve. Checking for any leaks, no leaks, so the needle dropped down to 0. That is a normal occurrence. It will build up as it gets all the air purged out of the line and through the fuel rail. Now, next step is to start the engine. Best done in a well-ventilated area. We'll let it run for a few minutes. Now we're seeing bubbles coming in through the line itself, so we know it's about time to shut off the engine. Now you can see them coming into here. And plus, if you shut it off at this point, less chances of setting a trouble code. And then we can let it hot soak. Disconnection is the opposite of connection. First, we turn off the valve going to the hose. Second, we are going to release the air pressure. Third, disconnect the air hose. Fourth, we're going to disconnect the Schrader valve fitting from the Schrader valve adapter. Going to wrap it in a rag. Still get a little bit of spray, not bad. Then, with a simple thumb release, with a rag covering it, We're going to disconnect the adapter to the fuel rail. Now we'll disconnect the blocked off supply line. Reconnect the supply line. Put the safety clip back in place. We will replace our relay and our fuse. And then lastly, we're going to start the engine and just do a quick check for leaks.
Next, cleaning the induction system with the S-tool is recommended, except for vehicles with diesel engines. Otherwise, drive the vehicle for about 5 minutes or 5 miles aggressively to expel carbon deposits from the engine.
Now we're going to do the second half of the process, which is the induction cleaning, or cleaning of the intake, throttle body, backs of valves, tops of the pistons. Just makes for a complete, more thorough job. And in doing that, we are going to use the S-tool adapter, which is this right here. Very simply, it hooks onto the canister directly. No other adapters required, just with the quick connect. And then we'll put this into the throttle body. And then we are going to use the other half a can of SeaFoam. We've already used 8 ounces for doing the fuel rail cleaning. Now we are using the other half the can for doing the induction portion of the job. We take our canister, make sure our valve on the back is in the closed position, unscrew the lid. We have the half a can of SeaFoam left over from doing the injection service. Add it, put our lid back on, and then we simply hang it back from the hood. And in this step is simply installing the S-tool into the air intake. I've already loosened the screws, holding the boot in place, the S-tool, slide it back forward, kind of paying attention to where the tip of the tool is, the sprayer. Then we slide our boot back on. We will tighten our clamp to hold it firmly in place. And then reconnect the breather tube in this application. And then we can go ahead and hook the feed tool from the canister to the S-tool. Next step, connect the shop air. Then dial in our pressure, which with the S-tool we want to run it at about 80 psi. So right about there. Then we're going to open the door and start the engine. And open valve. Sometimes it is best to increase the engine RPMs to about 1500. Now that we got the bubbles running down the hose coming from the canister to the S-tool, so I'm going to go ahead and let the engine idle back down and turn the key off. Then shut the valve off. So pretty much you want to let it sit 10, 15, 20 minutes, even longer if you got time. But in doing this, basically while the engine's hot, all the components are hot, the backs of the valves, tops of the pistons have SeaFoam on them, basically melting the gum carbon varnish deposits that are built up on the backs of the valves and the tops of the pistons. This next step is simply disconnecting the tool. We have our valve turned off already. We are going to relieve the pressure, disconnect our air supply, and finally we remove the S tool from the throttle body itself. Disconnect your quick connect, loosen up the boot, slide the boot back, and slide your S tool out. Boot back on. Remove all your tools from the engine compartment. Replace any said accessory engine covers. And now for the road test. You want to drive the vehicle aggressively, varying engine speed, and you're going to get some smoke and some extreme fumes coming out of the tailpipe. But when it is all said and done, it's going to be a lot cleaner with a lot better emissions. The difference between gas direct inject and multi-port fuel injection is very simple. This is a set of injectors out of a 4-cylinder multi-port fuel injection. This is a typical piston assembly. Basically, these will squirt usually in from the side like this. They spray right into the intake manifold, through the intake valve, and on top of the piston. On a direct inject engine, you have a much smaller, much more higher pressure injector. It goes right into the combustion chamber and sprays right on top of the piston assembly itself. So, thus forth, not cleaning the backs of the valves, allowing them to get dirtier quicker. Now, your connections for your GDI or gas direct inject engines are pretty much the same as doing multi-port fuel injected systems. I just want to show you a few different things on your direct inject hookups that'll make it simple, easy, and safe to clean the injectors on these systems. I have hooked up the cleaning canister as done on the multi-port fuel injection tool. We're hooked up to the low pressure side of the high pressure pump with the tool. Here is your fuel supply line coming from the tank, with our exclusive block off tool in the fitting end of the fuel line. And of course, removing the fuel pump fuse as per the manufacturer's procedure. The next step is to pressurize it, and it calls for 67 to 74 psi, so we're going to run it just a tad over 70, and then we open our valve, and then the next step is to be in a well ventilated area and start the car. Now that we see the bubbles coming down the tube from the canister, we'll wait just a little bit until the hose is almost clear and turn the key off. And finally, on this GDI, gas direct inject engine, we're going to do the final step of the process, which is going to be the induction service. I have already installed an S-tool, similar to this one, right into the throttle body, right at the top with the sweep of the throttle plate, just as I had shown earlier in the multi-port injection video. So, we are going to turn the pressure up to 80 psi on the canister, and before we start it up, I just want to make a quick note, because a lot of these direct inject engines, they're smaller engines, they're using turbochargers and superchargers to produce more horsepower. So that having been said, just SeaFoam is safe to use through the air intake system of your turbocharged and supercharged engines, as well as of course your naturally aspirated engines like this one. So again, it won't hurt any of the gaskets, seals, or O-rings. So with that being said, hit the key, Keith, and keep it about 2,000 RPMs. Now we open the valve. Gauge drops to 0. That is perfectly normal. And this part of the procedure is probably going to take about 5 minutes. We go until we start seeing bubbles. What I'm going to do when it gets down to the radiator hose down in this area, I'm going to have Keith go ahead and shut the engine off. Go ahead and shut it off. So now we can simply turn down our pressure regulator, disconnect, and if you'd like, you can actually open up the valve. We're just purging the last bit of the air out of the line just to make it easier to disconnect everything. And again, let it hot soak, give it at least 15 minutes. Taking it out, we want to drive it kind of aggressively. And notice the darkness of the smoke. The darkness is actually an indication of the deposits that we removed from the backs of the valves and the combustion chambers and the intake passages. I think that smoke appears a little bit lighter. So now we have gone and gotten the junk out of the system, and now we're down to just burning off the rest of the SeaFoam.